From the 2017 Western Governors Association Winter Meeting in Phoenix, Arizona, I'm Chris Berry, and I'm here with Eddie Calvo, the governor of Guam. Governor, thanks for joining us today, and welcome stateside for a little while.
Well, good morning, Chris. And with the way we say it in Guam, half a day. It's kind of like aloha, but like half a day from the people of Guam.
I like that. You know, the Western Governors Association, and you're about as far west as it gets.
By the way, I always make a joke about that. We are the Western Governors Association, but I'm from that part of the world where I am so far west that we are in the Far East.
Right, where America's Day begins, right? Yeah, you're on the other side of the international date line there
exactly.
in Guam. You know, this Western Governors Association was founded really to kind of tackle some of the unique issues that face the governors in the West, and I don't know if originally they had thought that Guam was going to be a part of the organization, but do you have the same kind of issues that, you know, that these other governors are dealing with right now? You're in a unique situation.
Actually, I think for the Western governors, and that means not only the contiguous Western states, but the outlying states of Alaska and Hawaii, and then the territories of Guam, the Northern Marianas, and American Samoa. They're very similar in certain aspects, even though you would think not. We are obviously the farthest either states or territories from Washington, D.C. Many states and territories in the West, there are so much lands within these states or territories that are under the control of the federal government. And also some of the edicts that come out of Washington, D.C., out of a lot of bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., the impacts that they have on Western states and territories are really painful. I hate to say it after 7 years as a governor, but painful. So there are similarities. And whether it's on certain rules or regulations that apply to states and territories and how they constrict a state or territory's ability to really reach its full potential. I think there's a lot of similarities.
So there certainly are a lot of similarities. You talked about that whole Washington situation. Though I'd like to kind of go off on a little path here and talk a little bit about these threats that North Korea had earlier this year about basically they said that they could strike Guam. How did that hit you when you first heard that news story?
Well, I guess would you believe it's a double-edged sword? Because, again, as you're having this interview with me, many folks probably don't know that places such as Guam are a part of the United States. They may have heard about it in history and maybe World War II or the Vietnam War.
Your dollar bill has George Washington on it,
exactly.
Right?
We're American soil. And what has occurred as a result of the threats by Kim Jong-un and North Korea, it's put a focus on the Western Pacific, East Asia, but particularly to American soil. Now that's Guam and the Marianas. So with that, it has been an education for many folks in the United States. And I'm talking not just the citizenry, but also a lot of policymakers and decision makers in Washington, D.C. about issues that are affecting Guam. So in one end, we don't like being threatened by folks with funky hairdos like Kim Jong-un. But on the other side of it, I think it was an opportunity to get some of the story and the message about a territory called Guam, a very loyal American citizens that are really, we are the farthest flung American territory, but we are Americans. And it's important that our voices are heard just as any other American wants to have their voices heard by the federal government.
And you kind of made a statement when all this was going on, which I thought was pretty significant. You said you never felt safer.
Being in that part of the world, and I've talked to some of our governors about it here, even in this recent conference, we're basically in the international side of things. Guam is not connected to the contiguous 48. And with that, we have a different perspective. With North Korea, this is not the first threat. The first threat came in 2013 when Kim Jong-un stated that he would attack Guam. So we are used to it. But then at the same time, we know what a dictator such as Kim Jong-un is trying to do. He's trying to intimidate his will on who he believes are his adversaries. I think it's like someone growing up in school. If there's a bully, you better be very clear with that bully. And sometimes with a bully, if you try to have passive resistance, what's going to happen? You're going to get punched. And sometimes the best way to deal with a bully is to punch him in the nose first. And the good thing about President Trump and the Department of Defense, they were very clear when a threat was made about a missile being shot towards Guam, that any attack on the United States or its territories would be met with fire and fury, and I would like to add also brimstone. You will note that even since that time, even with the missile firings that have occurred, none of them have gone south. There have been missile firings, but they've all gone due either north or east, which is towards Japan. And I think what is evident is that Kim Jong-un is very wary about provoking the United States into military action. So I'm glad that the president, I'm glad that the Department of Defense was very clear of what the consequences were for any potential attack on United States soil, and that states or territories are their allies.
So Governor Eddie Calvo from Guam joining us at the Western Governors Association meeting in Phoenix, Arizona. So, Governor, I wanted to ask you, what do you hope to achieve over the next couple of days here in Phoenix?
Again, it's a meeting of minds with the governors and looking where we can work towards like issues. I go back to some of the issues that are affecting Guam. As a governor, I do believe that the greatest obstacle to progress has not been something that was made in Guam. A lot of the obstacles to progress, they're manufactured in Washington, D.C. And as I work with my fellow governors to see how we can assuage some of these issues and decisions or non-decisions made, it's interesting you bring up about North Korea. Guam, I think people now realize, is a very strategic military base for American projection of power in the Western Pacific and East Asia. With that, there was a decision made several years ago for a realignment of forces to bring in an expeditionary force of Marines to be based on Guam. And that is ongoing. But
about how many Marines are we talking about?
We're looking about 5,100 Marines and about 1,500 to 1,800 of their dependents.
So a nice rapid deployment group that could get out of there and get anywhere pretty much.
Yeah, and there has been a budget set forth. It's a little bit over $8 billion. $3.6 billion is financed by the taxpayers of Japan. They're helping out on this, as well as the remainder being financed by the Defense Department. But as we move forward in the construction of these bases, certain unilateral acts have occurred by different agencies of the federal government without any change of rule or regulation, just arbitrary and capricious. One of them was the total removal of skilled H2 and H1 workers from the island of Guam. And construction and healthcare.
And didn't you just talk to the president about that a few weeks ago?
And he gave me his promise, and I saw the order also given to Chief of Staff Kelly to get this thing done. And I told the president and the Chief of Staff, you folks understand what it's done in the short term for Guam. It's doubled the price of a home for the everyday consumer in Guam to build a home. But then at the same time, not only hurting Guam's economy, how do you propose to build $8 billion worth of construction projects in Guam when you've taken out 25% of the skilled workforce? And, Guam has been exempt from the H2 cap, and a lot of it has to do with our strategic importance. We are small in population. We only got about 165,000 people. We've got 4,000 U.S. citizens, construction workers, but because of the growth we've had over the past decade, we've had to add about 1,500 H2B skilled construction workers, masons, carpenters, and steel rod workers. How can you propose this drastic increase in construction and then take a quarter of our workforce out? It's perplexing, and it's caused so much damage to our economy, and I also believe it's caused the plans that the United States has strategically for that part of the world in terms of military investments and construction are jeopardized. And this is done by bureaucrats. My concern is I see the president gave an order. I saw the chief of staff, and by the way, I even talked to Chief of Staff John Kelly when I saw him give the order. I said, Chief, I've heard the order. The president has given you an order. I said, I've heard it as well. I'm going to get it done. My concern is now you have a president and a chief of staff in White House that want to get it done, but I've been 7 years working with the bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., and that's my concern now. If there is enough weight to break through some of these really crazy decisions made in the by the federal government, certain agencies. So that's one of the major issues affecting Guam.
You talk about those issues as it relates to visas, the military. It's like a third of the land now in Guam, isn't that military reservations? So obviously there's a lot of soldiers, sailors, Marines who at least temporarily make Guam their home. What do you do with all this construction to make sure that they have a good quality of life also?
Well, I think that was the important thing with this programmatic agreement that I signed with the then Secretary of the Navy as we move forward in this buildup. It was supposed to be a one Guam approach. So with this construction activity that's occurring and the addition of military forces and their families, that the quality of life in the island would not diminish, but actually would improve, not only for those folks that are living within military bases, but also outside. And I can tell you there's been a lot of appropriations. We've had appropriations made for improvement of our infrastructure, such as water, wastewater, hardening of our bridges and paving of our roads, appropriations made for improvements in our port facilities as well as our airport, monies that were approved for a repository so that any collection of historical artifacts would be collected and preserved as a result of all this construction activity. So I'm seeing that when it came to at least the Department of Defense and when it came to congressional appropriations, that commitment has been made. It's those regulatory agencies that are causing some of the major problems as we move forward in this program and the strategic plan for realignment of forces in the Pacific.
And so that's probably dealing with the bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is something that you're looking to get some ideas from the governors here while you're in Phoenix.
Oh, yeah. We also deal with issues, and I go back to federal rules and regulations, particularly in the Obama administration with EPA. And if you take a look at many of the requirements put by EPA to the people of Guam on just the compliance on Clean Water and Clean Air Act regulations, and many of these things with imposed timetables, let's say 2023 to 2025, the total amount is over $1.4 billion. And then when you look at the number of people that live in Guam, and I'm talking about 160 plus thousand people, that equates to $10,000 for every man, woman, and child in Guam. And the irony in all this, as the federal government has thrown this and forced this to the people of Guam, in any given day when the wind is blowing wrong, you're seeing smog coming from China. Or if the wind is blowing another way, it's coming from the forest fires of Indonesia. So you have an American territory where we don't contribute too much to carbon emissions that are polluting the environment. And we're surrounded by neighbors that do business with the United States and make a lot of money. Much of the stuff you buy at a Walmart probably comes from China. So we are doing business with so many countries that are causing a lot of these issues in Guam in terms of pollution. And yet the people of Guam have to absorb $10,000 for every man, woman, and child. And we got to get it done by 2023 or 2025. Again, that is an issue that is not only restricted to the people of Guam. I think other states and territories have these same issues in regards to federal regulations and mandates.
We're speaking with Governor Eddie Calvo of Guam at the Western Governors Association meeting in Phoenix, Arizona. For those of us who have not been to Guam, and it's a long way. How long does it take you to get to, say, Los Angeles?
Well, a typical, like to get over here to Arizona, I started in Guam at 1 o'clock in the afternoon Wednesday. I took a 3-hour flight to Narita and spent 2 hours at Narita. That's in Japan. Then I took a connecting flight from Narita to San Francisco. That's about 9 hours. Spent 2 hours in San Francisco International Airport, and then took the flight over to Arizona and got here at Wednesday at 4 in the afternoon. So at least the good news is we're so far in the future that what should have been almost a 24-hour affair, I got there in Wednesday for just in time for dinner.
It's going to catch you going back, though.
The problem with Father Time, he always catches up on you. So when I head back to Guam after this trip, I'm gonna lose a day.
Yeah.
So it's quite it's quite a journey.
So and I'm sure worth every minute that you're on that plane or ship headed that way. But if I were to go to Guam, or anyone listening were to go to Guam, what sort of what's the highlight?
Okay.
What is it that we would expect
First
to see
of all,
there?
and I think a lot of people, the history of Guam is World War II battle, Vietnam War. We had, when this North Korean crisis, I was in one press conference where there were over 100 reporters, and they weren't just from the United States, such as CNN or Fox or ABC, NBC, and CBS, but I even had Haaretz media from Israel, Al Jazeera from the Middle East, many Asian media, even folks from media from Africa. I can still remember the comment made by a CNN reporter as he was interviewing me with a beautiful sunset behind me. He says, this reminds me of Hawaii without the crowds. And really what Guam is, if I was a kid growing up in the 60s, going to Hawaii back in the early 60s, mid-60s, Guam is, we get a lot of tourists. We get about 1.5 million tourists annually. But there's still enough green and there's still enough open space that you feel that you're in a tropical island. So really what Guam is, again, I go back to that reporter who had already a preconceived notion. It's what you would think a South Pacific island is, with the beautiful beaches and ocean and sunrises and sunsets, great food and great shopping, and there's still enough room there to take a deep breath and enjoy it.
That's terrific.
Come to Guam, everybody.
Governor Eddie
And I
Calvo.
assure everybody, Guam is safe. Guam is safe. Come on over.
Well, you've got all those soldiers, sailors, and Marines there. It better be. Thanks again, Governor Eddie Calvo from Guam at the Western Governors Association meeting in Phoenix, Arizona.
Thank you so much.